Hi there. Today we're going to be having a quick look at connecting databases to Delphi. We're going to have to create connections between the database and Delphi. There are several connections involved because we've got a connection between the database and Windows using a database driver. And then we have a connection between Delphi and the database driver, which establishes a connection between Delphi and database. We're going to have a number of tables inside the database, so Delphi provides controls to work with different tables, and we're going to have components that are going to be connecting to those tables and displaying and editing content, and we will have a data source that will enable us to manage that connection as well. So several components are involved. To begin with, let's insert a T-ADO connection. There we go, T-ADO connection. You'll find this in the DBGo set of components, along with the ADO queries and the ADO tables that you'll use to establish connections to specific tables inside the database, and also to work with SQL queries when we do that. To establish a connection to a database, you need to create a connection string. Now, you can do this programmatically, or we can use the built-in connection string little construction utility, which you will find here. Build, and we'll get the list of database providers that we have available to us. Now, the default set includes the driver needed for the older standard of Microsoft Access database. This one was used up until version 2003, so it's really getting long in the tooth these days. Security in that type of database is not very good. It's still a very popular database for small projects and when prototyping and speed is necessary when we're trying to build our environments. Also because the driver is readily accessible. It's available for a number of different platforms. Since version 2007, which replaced the 2003 version of Microsoft Office, there's been a newer database format with much improved security. Those drivers are also available as a free download. Unfortunately, they are only versions for Microsoft Windows. So if you're running the other systems, then you'll need to either use one of the commercial database drivers, which are available but do cost, or you'll have to revert to the older style of database using the JET driver. All right, I'll look at installing the Windows drivers for the newer versions of Microsoft Access a little bit later. For now, just to illustrate the principle, I'll be using this JET driver. Okay, so next, one of the minor advantages of using it is we get a file browser so we can browse to find the database. I'm going to use this games database just for the moment. Now I can test the connection just to see that it's working. Yes, it has succeeded. You'll notice that we have a place for a username. This is the database user. It's nothing to do with your computer account. By default, Microsoft Access databases have an admin user and it doesn't have a password. So that's what it's using when it's logging into the admin user with no password. And this one is set inside the database, and that's where we'll leave it. So we have an ADO connection component on our form. It has the connection string, but you'll notice on the left-hand side under the object inspector, it is not yet connected. There's also got this little login prompt thing. If I leave login prompt as true, as soon as I try and connect it, it's going to ask me for the username and password. The username is admin, the password is blank. It's the default setting and it's just irritating, at least with this type of database. So we're going to set login prompt to false and connect it to true. There we go. Of course, nothing is happening at this point. That just establishes the connection between our program and the database. It's not doing anything. We need to add a connection to the table. So I'm going to look for an ADO table. There we go, an ADO table. You'll notice also in the DBGo section. And we're going to use this to connect to an individual table in the database. To be able to do that, I'm going to have to connect my ADO table to the ADO connection. One of the properties of an ADO table you'll find is connection. That will be the ADO connection. As soon as that connection is established, down towards the bottom of this list, you'll find table name. I can say I want to use, in this particular instance, there is only a games table in the database file, so I'm going to use games, and I'm going to make this active. Again, this is something you can do programmatically. When I'm busy working with tables, very often I'm going to want to make it inactive if I'm going to be affecting something to do with the way it is displayed, like adding a filter or doing a search inside it, then I'll need to make it active again. So we'll be doing that programmatically a lot inside our code. And also you can change the table name it's connected to, assuming you have more than one table in the database. So you can use the same ADO table component to work with multiple tables. Right, let's look at what database components are available. And you'll find we have data controls. I'm going to come back to data access in a moment. We've got data controls, and this gives us a number of data-aware components. A data-aware component is just one that has built-in connectivity to databases. It can work with information that comes from a database. And to illustrate it, I'm going to put on a DB grid just for the moment, and a DB navigator, which provides an interesting little set of buttons. There's my DB grid. I would like to connect this and the navigator to that one table. To do this, again, I need an intermediary. The intermediary comes from the data access set of components. There we are, and it is this data source. The data source is going to have to take data from the ADO table. The reason for this is I may have several data sources on my form. I may have several tables that I'm connected to. And with the one data source, I can just change which table I'm working with simply by changing its connection. And all the components on the form, as soon as they're connected to the data source, will then immediately update to work with the new table. Data source, we're going to choose the data set. The data set is ADO table 1 at the moment. I haven't changed any of the names of these fields. Now, DB grid, I can say I want to work with data source 1. And whoa, there's information. Same with the navigator. Data source 1. And what I have here is not a very imaginative program. There's nothing terribly interesting in the database. It wants me to save this quickly. Save that. It would be much better to create a folder for it, but here we go. I have a fully functioning program, no code whatsoever at the moment. All I've done is establish connection to the database, and if I want to add a new entry, let's add a new entry, and this ID can be 6. We can say this is go scored 2, MID was 3, and commit. And this is now permanently added into the database. You'll notice that even though it was inserting in the top row, it appears at the bottom. Tables are added onto. We never actually insert in the middle of a table. There would be a lot of copy operations to move things down. So the tables are always appended to. You can delete information from it, but it never leaves a gap. Tables are only appended to, and information is updated from there. And that's it, connecting to a Microsoft Access database. So what about working with one of the newer forms? Well, when working with one of the newer database forms, we have a small problem. And the problem is called Office 365. Office 365 runs in small sandboxes. So the access drivers are not necessarily accessible from outside the sandbox. And that means we can't use them from inside Delphi. Microsoft is making some effort to make these available to applications so that they can use the drivers. As you can see from my system, currently running Windows 11 and Office 365, the drivers are not accessible to the Delphi platform. That means we need to add the freely downloadable drivers ourselves, and we'll have to add it for the desktop version. The other minor hassle at the moment is that the version number for Office 365 for the Access drivers is the same as the 2016 desktop Office. So if I try and add those drivers, I'll end up with a version conflict inside Office itself. I'm going to have to add a slightly older driver set. I'll have to add the 2013 edition. If you go along to Microsoft site, there is a link to this on the website, but you will find the Microsoft Access 2013 runtime, and you can click download and it will download the drivers. You will have the option for either the 32-bit or the 64-bit driver. This depends a bit on your Delphi version. If you're using a 32-bit version of Delphi, such as the 2010 edition, then you will have to use the 32-bit x64 over there version of the Access drivers. Otherwise, it can't access them. If you're using a newer version of Delphi, a 64-bit version, then you should be able to run the 64-bit drivers. The one caveat with that, though, is you need to be making a 64-bit application as well. If you're making 32-bit applications, then you'll run into problems there too. So safest, probably just installing the x86 driver set. I have downloaded these, so I will be installing them from my download. You run the installation file, you will have to accept the terms of the agreement. There we go. And it will then install the drivers for you. Right. And we're done. You'll probably have to restart your Delphi. I have just done that for mine. But as soon as you do that, you will have these drivers available. The audio connection, there's an audio connection. Put another one on here just for a moment. And you have a look, build. You will now see I have a Microsoft Access 12 and a Microsoft Access 15 database engine available. I remember I installed the 32-bit version on this because at the moment we're building Windows 32-bit programs. And I can use that to access the newer versions of databases. All right, that's the basic process for establishing a connection. And just as a side note, how to install the drivers that you need to be able to work with Microsoft Access from versions 2007 until current version. Okay. Have fun with that. Bye for now.